Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of System Link for Wednesday, the 9th of July, 2025. I'm your host, Jonathan Garrett, joined as always by my co-host from the Xbox Guide, Mike Hazelton. Mike, how are you doing?
Yeah, really good, thanks. How are you doing?
Yeah, feeling good, feeling ready. We've got a couple of little headlines and then obviously some ongoing fallout, our ongoing deep dive, ongoing, which is the Xbox stuff. It's a bit of a shit show with the big M right now with Microsoft and all those recent cutbacks, studio closures, and everything in between. There's a
We
couple of
came
sort
in
of
hot with it last week, didn't we?
did,
So there's been
yeah,
a lot that's come out since that we
yes.
can talk about.
We kind of
Be good.
it was inevitable it was going to be an ongoing conversation, I think, and there are a couple of to try and glass half full it. There are a couple of redeeming stories which we can talk about, but it's a mess out there, and they've got a uphill climb, I think, to reinstall some faith with their player base that this isn't just going to be a case of sort of the first of many. How much is a safe bet? You know, there are things I thought that were going to be long-term bets for them that clearly haven't panned out. It's unclear, I think, at this stage which studio and which projects are a guarantee and which are on the
Well, and
chopping block.
we had the first of many, which was Tango, and
Hmm.
Redfall being basically cancelled very quickly, and Arcane shutting down. They've that wasn't that long ago that Tango got
No,
shut.
and
So
it's made me want to relook at things like, I know we're getting into it, but it made me want to relook at things like Toys for Bob divesting. Were they potentially on the chopping block and basically said, could we, because we're an Activision studio, it's a little bit of a different deal. I'd love to know what was going on there, because that was very strange to me. It seems like they're working on a second party title for them. They've said that their partner is Microsoft. So I'd be
and
very
they've
nervous about their future. If they've divested from Xbox to avoid a closure, formed a second party partnership using an Xbox IP, but then if Xbox yanked the funding like they've did with Romero games, where's that going to leave Toys for Bob? Without the
and
Activision safety net.
what have Toys for Bob done that's deserved getting shut down? Like they've
I know.
generally produced pretty high quality stuff, haven't they?
Mm-hmm.
Compared like most of the teams that have been shut, you can make a case for
Mm-hmm.
they've underperformed, or the games are taking too long to come out, or the teams are bloated too much. Toys for Bob, I don't think you can say. I don't think you can say that with Tango either
No,
particularly.
certainly not.
That was a weird one.
Well, that was supposed to be Microsoft's dip a toe in the Japanese market, getting some legitimacy with a studio that had a great pedigree and IP that people were hungry to see again. You know, Hi-Fi Rush, it was exciting, the idea of a big Tango IP shadow dropping. It generated a frenzy. Whether that had the longevity that it needed, maybe with their new approach, it would be interesting if that had happened, the PS5 and Switch support had happened a year earlier than it did. I would have loved to have seen if that had any impact on their longevity, because then their profit margin as a studio became better. They were able to sell at full price. Whether that could have kept them within their infrastructure, don't know.
Yeah, I think this is part of the problem, is that it's similar to the PlayStation Live service. Games being cancelled. It's a bit of a, like with Scalebound, like where they're trying to court Japan, so they invest a load of money in a Japanese game, and then they change their mind because stuff isn't working in Japan, so they cancel all the Japanese investments that they've been doing. And it's a similar sort of story. You feel like Perfect Dark was probably greenlit when the full kind of nature of Game Pass wasn't really known. Possibly even before, like the day one game coming into Game Pass was launched, and they saw the true impact of that. And then suddenly games, in my opinion, games that are costing hundreds of millions of pounds to make, don't make as much sense on Game Pass as they.
Yeah.
Stuff that like Obsidian is making makes total sense for Game Pass. Games that are like 80s on Metacritic they're producing them quite efficiently. It takes like 3-4 years to come out. Not really any danger that an Obsidian game is going to take 8-10 years.
They're a well-practiced multi-team structure within their studio, so that's something that I think that's attractive to Microsoft in their current form. I think that a studio that can deliver that. There aren't many teams outside of stuff like the Coalition, which are kind of that single team focus. But then they've got their hands in other games too. They're supporting with Unreal Engine, so even they, in a sense, have a wider impact, I think, on their first party structure. Much like Bethesda, we've seen id Software dive in and out of other games. Have been reported they've been sharing tech and secrets around Unreal Engine. So,
should we go through the kind of Game Pass bits that we had, or the Fallout stuff that we had?
Yeah,
I feel like we're getting into that.
well, let's just
already.
flip the script, shall we? So we're going to kick off tonight with a deep dive. As always, System Link keeping it fast and loose. If you are checking out the show live on YouTube and Twitch, good evening, Game with Passion. Thank you so much for jumping in. You can also check out the show on demand, both on YouTube, I always fuck that up at the moment. YouTube, Spotify, Podbean. They've got their various bits and pieces going on there, so please do consider checking out the show. We always post that up the next day, but thank you again for joining us live. We stream this every Wednesday night, 9:15 PM UK time. Yeah, let's do it. Let's flip the script. Let's go into some of the Xbox news, both good and bad, and also in our deep dive tonight, which is on the ongoing fallout from all of their cancellations, layoffs, and cutbacks as a publisher. One shining light, let's switch briefly to some positivity, is something I never expected to see. I genuinely didn't think this day would come. Helldivers 2 is coming to Xbox, and that is remarkable. I thought Sony had that shit all wrapped up. It had been such a barnstorming success, really arguably one of their only live service success stories, both day and date with PC as well, I believe. Might have to fact check me, but I believe it was their first PC and PS5 day and date release for a new title. And certainly in their live service push. Not a first-party team, it's a second-party studio, but that has been a runaway hit for them. And on the same day that it releases for Xbox, Gears of War Reloaded will be released for PlayStation. It seems too coincidental for it to not have some kind of backdoor shady deal there. But I do think Sony are reading the terrain very smartly. They must have paid attention to the fact that Sea of Thieves and Forza Horizon 5 blew up on the PlayStation Store. They must be aware of the perception and impact that those multiple live service cancellations, arguably perhaps not as in terms of studio members and like employees in terms of cuts, but in terms of projects being binned off. There have been multiple high-profile cancellations from Sony this gen as well, the biggest of which probably being The Last of Us Online. You know, Naughty Dog stepping away from that was a pretty huge thing. And now we're seeing, obviously, Marathon, although not strictly first-party because they're saying it's multi-platform, but they're owned by Sony now, and Bungie are stepping back with Marathon indefinitely delayed. Won't be surprised if we see that get cancelled too. Deviation Games, another studio which, much like The Initiative, was set up outside of Sony this time, though, bought out by Sony without releasing a game several years later. They don't exist anymore. So it's a real... Helldivers 2 represents a real shining light for them, a real success story, and to have that come to Xbox with full crossplay is very exciting and very needed good news from Microsoft right now.
Yeah. And I think it's similar to kind of the Grounded Pentiment, because it's not a big PlayStation IP. It's a game that happened to be exclusive to PlayStation. The Helldivers 2 is a bit more of a deal going on, or being funded by Sony. It seems like, but it's definitely notable. It's completely different to the MLB example, but I don't think like it's going to open floodgates for. I can't think of any other PlayStation games that would make sense to come over. In the same way that Helldivers 2 makes sense. I think maybe in a few years we might start to see it open up a bit more. But
given their hesitance to release their first party stuff day one into their service, they've said openly that it's at least a year before any of those games will appear, unless it's a live service multiplayer title where it will launch day and date across PC and console, but still not in the PlayStation Plus necessarily. I think if Concord had gone the distance, we would be seeing a Concord summer release on Xbox, I think. Fair Games, I think, would also now be fair game for an Xbox release. I think that's how they're going to do it. They're going to do multi-platform releases for their live service titles.
Yeah, I do wonder if you can almost use the PC releases as a barometer, whether stuff that's come to PC at some point you could see coming to Xbox even further down, like another 2 years after PC or something. None of the like Last of Us and stuff's never been on PC, is it?
Oh yes, it has.
The
Yeah.
big. Oh, it
So
has. Okay,
so
yeah. I didn't see that.
almost everything now is on PC, as in the big titles.
Okay.
So Days Gone, Last of Us, God of War, Spider-Man is on PC now as well, both of them, plus Miles Morales. So, yeah, I could see certainly it being like PlayStation is your day one release, with PC either day and date or shortly thereafter. A year later, it's put on PlayStation Plus. 2-3 years down the line, if they're just sitting on Spider-Man, it could just make a bunch of money for them.
To be honest, Spider-Man is the one that makes the most sense, because stuff like God of War, if you've been in the Xbox ecosystem for the last 10, 15 years, I don't think God of War interests you particularly. Just I mean, you might. It's similar. You might try it out, but it's not. It's similar to, some of the Xbox stuff that we've been talking about. I think if you're interested in those games, you already own that platform. But Spider-Man, because it's got broad appeal, I think makes a lot of sense.
Well,
People would just buy it on Xbox because it's Spider-Man.
But this is where this attitude might end up shifting, because if you're interested in those games, you've had to buy that platform to be able to play them up to this point. So I think it's knowing what people are going to be feeling about that 5 years from now, what that landscape looks like. I don't think that can be reasonably predicted at this stage, because people have had to. They've had no choice but to get into the ecosystem that way. The way we are consuming these games and the nature of what an exclusive is shifting. So I do wonder if that's where we start seeing more differentiation in services and hardware, when the exclusivity wall has largely broken, except for Nintendo, of course. But, I don't think it's crazy to think that one day Nintendo release on Steam. I don't think that's a crazy idea, because I never would have thought in a million years I would be seeing Forza Horizon 5 on a PlayStation. So, I don't think it's completely insane.
I think that the thing is, Nintendo do so much more numbers than anyone else.
Yes.
So that it's and they're also, their games are so much cheaper to make. So I think part of the reason why they're having to release on multiple platforms is because of the development costs. I'm sure Helldivers 2 has more than made its money back already, but
yeah,
I imagine they're kind of recouping costs for other studios that aren't making their money back, or are struggling to make their money back by putting Helldivers 2.
And covering the fact that we've had some very high-profile cancellations. They've put a lot of money and a lot of bets behind live service that arguably none of them have panned out. The stuff that has been other titles.
I completely take your point that PlayStation have cancelled some stuff, but I do think it's a lot worse to cancel things that you've shown, like ostensibly gameplay footage of, and shown like in the last 6 months or a year you've shown it, and everyone said this is great, and Phil Spencer said it's great, I've played it,
and then they pull the plug, and then
you cancel it.
And then you bring in you bring in Crystal Dynamics to help with the initiative and Perfect Dark. And that's a big announcement that you're partnering with a very seasoned team and beloved studio, only for that to still not be enough to get it over the line. Again, with Pasha mentioning in the live chat on YouTube, don't think we'll see single-player PlayStation games on Xbox. I think that's fair up to a point. Like, I can't imagine The Last of Us going over there, or Uncharted, but I could see something like Spider-Man. If it's a Marvel Games partnership, I could see something like that going there for sure. All bets are off with that one. I think it's tough to say. But yes, I agree. I think it's much more egregious. That's why Concord was such a bigger hit than, say, the Twisted Metal game that was never formally announced or shown, or The Last of Us Online, which was only ever sort of loosely hinted at, and we saw some concept art. We never actually saw the gameplay itself. Concord was a much bigger hit because it existed, it was published, and then it got.
But then also the thing with Concord is people were saying this game doesn't look good enough. It like they were negative about it before it came out, in the same way that people are negative about Marathon, which is why it's not like Perfect Dark, which they showed, and it's kind of come out that they might have fabricated some of that sequence to make it look better than it was. But everyone was still reacting very positively to it, and then to have it cancelled when like the sentiment's really high, everyone's a bit different. But I think people were still broadly like, we want to see what this game is, rather than like, everyone's Rare, don't bother releasing.
Yeah, Rare are in a much better spot, I think, in the last couple of years, because Sea of Thieves has done well and has been. We had some great experiences with it, but we dropped away from that game for the lack of sort of meaningful narrative content and some of its sort of limited design. But the game itself broadly has been a success, and that studio has kind of redefined themselves around it. Everwild was kind of a logical, exciting next step for them, which is where that really stings as well, is they weren't able to, that thing wasn't able to coalesce and has ultimately been pulled. On this, again, slightly more positive side before we get into some relentless negativity, there are rumours that multiple Fallout games are in development, including a remake of, I want to say New Vegas, I believe was the thing people are really excited about. I mean, with the barnstorming success of the show on Amazon Prime, but also that Fallout 76 is still being well supported and is generally regarded now better than it was. I think the sentiment shifted a bit more positively on 76 than it was certainly in its first year when it first came out. It's a good time for Xbox to be capitalising. It's very strange that they haven't. They need to stop telling me that there are studios interested in making a Banjo game though, because can you just hurry up, please? You want to try to erase the memory of what's happening right now? Just show me the bear and the bird. I put Smash Brothers Ultimate on my Switch 2 the other day because I wanted to try out the online. I wanted to see if it had been any better, and it does play better without lag, which is helpful. And I only played as Banjo-Kazooie because I just wanted to use their moveset and play online with them on Smash. And it's so wholesome and so well lovingly recreated in that game. Why was there not a Banjo game that came out right around the Smash Brothers tie-in? What just terrible mismanagement. There was no connection between... I'm going to go on a soapbox now. There was no connection between Halo Infinite and Halo the TV series. Halo the TV series divested so much from... I need to stop using divested. It diverged so much from the source material that the show and the game should have had perfect synergy. Where was the crossover event? Where was the seasonal updates that tied in with narrative events in the story from the TV show? Such poor management from Xbox, and we see it time and time again. The Initiative is the latest casualty of that. They've just effectively cancelled Forza Motorsport, Mike. I'm still going. I
think for me, it doesn't. This is probably incorrect, but it feels like there isn't a kind of custodian of the Halo franchise anymore, in the way that you've got Neil Druckmann for Last of Us, you've got Todd Howard for Fallout.
Yeah.
Someone that can be an executive producer on the TV show and say, don't do that, that's wrong, or you could just tweak this and it will...
Yeah, and he's now...
he's stepping back.
To then...
Now it's shit.
Yeah, but he's going back to Intergalactic, isn't it, to their next game, which is, and that's really cool. Is that he's now giving that sort of that same level of focus. It's a very good show of faith in him as a studio that they want him back and they want to keep his focus.
But I don't know who from the Halo side would have that role. I'm sure there is someone at Halo Studios that kind of knows everything about Halo and would be suitable for that, but there just isn't a figurehead that we used to have at Bungie.
Yeah, and this is where, end of my rant, I mentioned that Forza Motorsport has all effectively been cancelled with the gutting of Turn 10. I think that was a real stinger for me. Perfect Dark was the first, with the Initiative not being allowed to finish, but...
Yeah, we didn't know about Turn 10 in the... Matt Booty kind of came out quite soon after the news leaked and said Perfect Dark and Everwild have been cancelled. And then everything else was unannounced, which a lot has come out as well about Phil Spencer's statement about the cancellations was a bad one, the way it was phrased. There was that executive at Xbox who was talking about AI to find new jobs.
Oh, saying, really don't worry, ChatGPT will give you advice. I mean, read the room, pal.
Matt Booty, I think, always comes across quite badly in these situations.
Well, Spencer wasn't immune, was he? Because he was saying about our most successful period. What a dreadful PR line. That's just tone deaf.
The way it was, Matt Booty's one phrased it, which was like, we're cancelling Everwild and Perfect Dark, and then other unannounced projects. Like, fair enough, the next Forza Motorsport is unannounced, but I feel like he should have said in that message that, we're putting the Forza Motorsport series on hold, or I'm sure they'll carry on supporting the current Forza Motorsport, but the assumption would be there would be another Forza Motorsport game in a year or two or three, which we're not going to get now. I don't think we know I don't even know if Dan Greenawalt was still there, but I don't know if kind of the executives at Turn 10 have gone.
Well, we know one very high-profile exit was Greg Mayles from Rare, 30 years plus at that studio, now retiring from that team. probably one of the last remaining major players in that golden era from the N64 and GameCube.
And
It's
I think he literally I don't know if he's director on Sea of Thieves or if but it was kind of his project was Sea of Thieves. Everwild, I think, as well was his project. I think the other kind of director on Everwild has gone as well, as you'd expect. But I think it's a real shame when you have someone like Greg Mayles who's basically the only survivor from the N64 era of Rare that's, you know, in a notable position. I'm sure there's probably one or two others still there, but to lose that figurehead, it would be, we've said before, like, it's hard to imagine Rare doing Banjo because we feel as though all the veterans have left. Obviously Greg Mayles is still there, so you would have confidence in him leading a Banjo team. I think he may have either he led Conquest Bad Fur Day, or the woman that was leading Everwild did Conquest Bad Fur Day. But to have people with that pedigree there, you would have confidence in them doing a Banjo game. But now, like, no chance that people that are probably may not have even been alive when Banjo-Kazooie came out,
right,
would be
now shaping it, you know. And and you look at the impact all of this has had on specific individuals. We're seeing it time and again, not just from people, you know, that sort of tone deaf ChatGPT post from that Microsoft executive, just absolutely dreadful. But we're seeing the impact on developers, but also some of the actors as well. I forget her name, but the lead actress who's playing Joanna Dark in the Perfect Dark reboot, expressing her disappointment. One of the actors from Deus Ex, Human Revolution and Mankind Divided, who played Jensen, was also had a role in that game, and was expressing his dismay at the fact that it's you know, work lost for them, and it was a great story that was worth telling. She's petitioning people to sort of get out there and lobby for its revival. One sort of possible slight, but this is the roller coaster that we're going on right now. John Romero and Romero Studio is still going. They're kind of assessing their options right now, looking at what lies ahead for them now that publisher funding has been yanked. They haven't expressly stated it's Xbox, but the timing and it's fairly obvious, I think, that it was them. And then you then have, you know, that absolutely, I really wanted to take some time to get into this, talk about impact to individuals. Chris String, who talked about Game Pass's profitability and how it wasn't profitable yet, and then had to create a two-page tweet long rebuttal of his own reporting to clarify that it was in fact profitable, even if individual studios weren't, because they don't factor in those numbers into the subscription service. They look at each game's profitability as a separate thing to Game Pass's profitability relative to the deals they make. So now that studios are able to release on multi-platforms, he's since clarified that, well, they're likely to make up their profit and loss for the games there, and then Game Pass itself as a model is profitable and is sustainable. But I've never seen anything like it, and I don't bleed green so much to think that everything coming out of Xbox is positive. We have been openly critical, even though it is one of our preferred platforms. We've been openly critical, and justifiably so, of their choices. But there is such a tremendous reporting bias in mainstream games media against Xbox, and I just don't see the same energy being applied to Sony when they are making similar moves, shutting down games, investing in studios that don't pan out, and Nintendo. I just don't remember the swath of articles coming out about, oh, are they going to be okay? In one breath talking about how that they have an infinite money hat and they're just throwing money at Game Pass until they don't, and then we just lose it in the future. And then by the same token saying, well, but what if they're not making enough money? Is it sustainable enough? It's full of contradiction and bias, and it frustrates the hell out of me. Soapbox number two.
I enjoyed. I think this isn't the first time he said it, or possibly someone else said it. But Chris String had to say, "I'm not a games journalist," which is always a good line.
It's so fucking bullshit. Jez Corden's the other one, isn't he? Where he says, "I'm not a journalist."
But to be fair, I think Chris String sees himself as a business journalist. So I think that was the distinction he was making, rather than I think
very flimsy distinction.
I'm just not qualified to talk about anything, basically.
Monster with an RPG coming into the Twitch chat. How you doing, buddy? I'm good. Thank you for tuning into my latest rant.
I think I kind of agree. I think there was a lot of negative sentiment about Concord in particular, and The Last of Us multiplayer. But I think the problem with Xbox is it's such a small part of Microsoft in a way that PlayStation is not a small part of Sony. PlayStation is a hugely important
Right.
business for Sony that and hugely successful and has been. That
So therefore, why is there not
it
more
wouldn't.
scrutiny of it when
Well,
it's such a
because it
fundamental
wouldn't even
part?
end. Because you could see Satya Nadella wakes up tomorrow and says, "I'm shutting Xbox. It's not doing it for me," and that conceivably, I would not put any significant sum of money on Xbox still being here in 10 years' time. I just wouldn't want to do that. But PlayStation, I think you would be far more Nintendo, like guarantee.
And is
PlayStation,
that
you'd be far more confident.
yeah? You're basing that on the sort of what's fundamental to their business model, right? And I think Sony
Yeah,
PlayStation is
and
a huge part of that, and Xbox is a wing of a much bigger company.
so people think because of the Activision buyout and because of the way Microsoft is run, it seems as though they're pumping money into Xbox to try to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's obviously, or it seems obvious to me, they haven't made the money back from the Activision buyout yet. You would imagine it would take 10 years to make the money back from the Activision buyout. Minecraft, I don't know whether they've made that money back. It was a hell of a lot. They probably have. But they're obviously playing a long game. But when they're doing that, this thing, we'll get to a point where they think this isn't going to work. And Phil Spencer obviously was it in the FTC leak? They had a projection for Game Pass.
That's right.
Numbers, which they're nowhere near now because they've been stagnating for.
Yeah.
So
they've acknowledged that a big change was that the growth was on PC, not console, which was an interesting shift, especially from their previous projections. I think maybe that's
so that.
Yeah.
I think they're reasonable concerns. It depends. It depends where you're reading it. I think there was also an important thing that came out of the Chris String conversation was I don't actually understand how Game Pass would not be profitable because he clarified that development costs aren't factored into it. So what cost does Game Pass have? It has the deals that they make with third parties to get games in the service, and that's it.
Yes, exactly.
They're not factoring in any first-party costs at all.
Right, which is where you can separate those things. Yeah, exactly. You can separate those things because if you took Game Pass out of the equation, they'd already have to have a budget for those titles to be funded and developed. And because they're all still being released for full price, and now in many cases releasing, they're in almost every case releasing PC day and date, but they're also coming to other platforms after X amount of time, there's that secondary spend there too. So just removing the Game Pass model, they would still be doing that, and that would still be their process. And you could argue then reasonably that sales are cannibalized. Games do sell less on Xbox because they're in Game Pass, but they are still making money on the full retail copies that do get ported. And Game Pass itself, if the margins for them is simply the deals they're making, that is clearly profitable with the amount of people that are subscribed. It's just I don't know why this conversation keeps coming up. Why this matters?
But I think it matters because there's studios that appear to not be profitable that have been shut, and would those studios? So do you think games make more money because they're on Game Pass or less money? First party games, total for Microsoft. Do you think Microsoft get more money at the moment from how their model now, or if Game Pass didn't exist, do you think they make more money from just selling the games?
I think they make more money because I think as a organization, Xbox generates more money because of the sub being in there. I think better with than without. That's my understanding of it. I think.
I think it's hard because we don't get any figures from Microsoft. They're so cagey on everything, which is I wouldn't want to invest in.
No, because they are weirdly secretive, Microsoft. Which is really strange. Only when that games hit astronomical milestones, like they justified the Sea of Thieves and Grounded ports by mentioning their player bases. If you remember, it was like 25 million and 30 million. That's one of the only times we ever heard like player numbers for those games. They hadn't even released
and they always say more hours than ever before, more players than ever before.
Yes,
it's never.
Let me make my position clear. I wanna put an asterisk on it. I'm confused as to why this conversation matters so much relative to the other platforms. It just seems that there is so much discussion about this, and it's always framed as they're failing, it can't possibly be sustainable. And I don't feel the same energy and sentiment directed towards other publishers and platform holders. Now, is that because Microsoft have made a rod for their own back by producing something that is so sort of top-heavy investment required to make it viable, and things like the Activision deal are so high profile, they're almost inviting criticism because of the nature of their money hat? It's a reasonable thing to surmise. It could be where that quote-unquote bias is shifting. Equally, like you said, and like I agree, I don't see how it couldn't be profitable at this stage when you've considered now how they are factoring in those some costs for them. It's just I do find that very frustrating as a reader and as someone who follows the industry. It's yeah,
I think it's more about, from what I've read, it's more about Xbox as a whole. The argument, it definitely is, Game Pass isn't sustainable, that's what people are saying. But I think that is why people are saying that's why the studios have closed, is because of Game Pass. And I think it's as kind of antagonistic as that sounds, I don't think we can say with certainty that isn't true, because there have been a lot of studio closures now. A lot of people, I don't know how many it is at Xbox, probably like 15,000 people have lost their jobs overall at Xbox, something like that.
In the last
and although months, people have lost jobs elsewhere at other games studios, of course, it's people are passionate about their games. It's the same as if Netflix bought the rights to a show that was still being produced and then gave it a season and then cancelled the show because they weren't making enough money.
Well, yeah, it's happening right now with Amazon. They've now fully owned the rights from MGM for the Bond license. So whatever we get next from Bond will not be produced by the current producing team that have, for some form or another, for the last set of films, all been responsible for that. So you can see that there's going to be a hesitation and a concern around that because of a shifting of the guard. I suppose I wonder in the case of when you look at the studios that have closed, not the cuts made. I'm talking about the ones that just do not exist as part of their first-party infrastructure right now. Arcane Austin produced a terrible game. Now, it was poorly managed and should never have been co-op multiplayer. I mean, that just tells you straight away that it was not their expertise. But the end product didn't sing and had to be cut. Great. Rare didn't fucking know what Everwild was. Of course that game has been cancelled, but the studio still persists because they've got value by comparison compared to Arcane Austin. They have an ongoing title that will be ported to PS5 that, has value. So I can understand where Arcane Austin shut and Rare didn't. That is clean to me. That makes sense.
For me, Turn 10 is the one. I can almost guarantee you, if Forza Motorsport have released at full price on Xbox and wasn't in Game Pass, Turn 10 would still be going because they would have made so much money, because Forza Motorsport is a tentpole first-party title.
And then it would have come out, probably. It probably would. They wouldn't be thinking about Gran Turismo. They would look at the fact that there hasn't been a Gran Turismo for ages, and they would have just released it on PlayStation a year later, and it would have absolutely blew up. It would have taken over.
Well, but this is the thing about Forza Motorsport, and why I think Turn 10 have more of a problem, is because that has a massive competitor on PlayStation. It's not like Sea of Thieves where there's no competition for it, or Gears of War where there's no competition for it. It's got Gran Turismo, which is objectively a better game than Forza Motorsport. Whereas on Xbox you've got nothing. So, and everyone's loyal to Forza, they'll buy it. Forza Horizon's different because there isn't.
And I think Helldivers 2 is going to make a killing on Xbox. I think it's going to do really well. I'm
a bit surprised they're releasing it the same day as Gears on.
It's
Xbox,
a backdoor shady deal. It's a backdoor shady.
I think that shows you that they're expecting Gears to have less relevance on Xbox because basically people have been playing that for years already. Although it's repackaged, but. So I think Turn 10 is the one for me that I think is a victim of Game Pass because that team hasn't made enough money, and it's difficult to see a place for Forza Motorsport on PlayStation because there's competition for it. I'm surprised Ninja Theory haven't been hit because I can't see Hellblade made much money at all.
I'll put my money where my mouth is.
Come out on PlayStation.
Yeah, I'll put my money where my mouth is. I'm talking about making sure that the reporting is equal. I don't know, and I love them. I don't know how Media Molecule is still here. They must cost Sony a fortune. After Dreams just
Are
stopped being
are they a
supported.
big team though?
I think they scaled up for Dreams, yes.
Do they?
But it's years.
Because like, they've always been like one of the sort of a, because they started off as quite an indie style. They seemed
did.
very small.
But
with,
then
like, Little Big
Sony
Planet.
have shut London studio, which was like had like Wipeout and like VR games. It's like it was feeding
and
PSVR.
yeah,
1.
Liverpool. Yeah,
Liverpool, and there were some real pedigree studios, and Media Molecule has remained. You know, Dreams is not being supported anymore. That took years to come out. It was showing up at conferences almost every year, and there hasn't been anything from them for so long. I'd be very worried about that team, much like I am about Ninja Theory.
Yeah, we'll see. It'll be interesting to see if PlayStation have to follow suit. I mean, I would. We've talked about Bungie a lot. Bungie, like I don't know how the ownership works at Bungie now, but for the size of that team, like that compared to Media Molecule, you'd imagine they're like 3-4 times the size of Media Molecule, if not more. They're like a ridiculously massive, oversized, in my opinion, studio that's not producing enough to justify it, similar to probably what the Initiative was turning into. And I think people are concerned about Bungie because they need to launch something that's a success. So. And if Marathon isn't a success, what have they got now for the next 5 years?
Let's look at something that wasn't. Anthem confirmed to be shutting down its servers in January 2026, start of next year. One of my biggest disappointments of a game. I absolutely was so excited for that. It was BioWare coming back with a new IP, and it was obviously just dreadful. Now going to be unplayable from January. I don't know who is still in that ecosystem and playing that game, but clearly not enough.
When did it come out? I mean, it's impressive it's lasted this long.
I know. I don't know why it wasn't just taken offline when it first got binned off, but it's kind of sparked, or not sparked necessarily in terms of its origin, but it's certainly added fuel to the Stop Killing Games petition, which has reached, I think, 1 million signatures now, over 1 million signatures, and a couple of sort of major publishers now being forced to acknowledge its existence, saying it's sort of, citing some sort of PR bullshit around sort of licensing, and it's a tricky thing when these games have such complex EULAs. But it's never been more relevant to the discourse happening right now as it is the backwards compatibility, support, and viability of games ongoing. Just the other day, and this is a very small example that no one cares about, but I saw at a retro games fair that I went to in Hemel here a couple weeks ago, a copy of the Bourne Conspiracy. It was the Xbox 360 Bourne game that I loved. Like I unreasonably loved that game. It was a swimming in sevens, but swimming in sevens. How dare you? Swimming in Sevens by Moon Studios, by the Ori developers. It was a pedigree team, and it was I love the Bourne films, and I really enjoyed the game. And you cannot play that video game right now. It never got a PC release. Oh, really? It's not on Steam, so it was only 360 and PS3. It has been delisted from both of those stores. You cannot download that game. It is not backwards compatible on Xbox, so you cannot just plop the disc in. You would have to play that on original hardware. Offline original hardware. A physical copy in order to play it. And that sucks for a team that put in so much to make something that was, for all intents and purposes, quite a high profile, not a movie tie-in. It was like a licensed game, but not movie tie-in. So it had its own story and its own sort of world and characters that related to the Bourne trilogies. But it just made me think about how this is such a commonplace thing now, the viability of games being supported and studios being able to preserve their back catalogues both before and after some horrible cuts like we're facing now. I am so glad that Nintendo supported physical Switch 1 cartridges on my Switch 2. It's made me very grateful for that, because as things now seem to be moving more and more digital, my PS5 Pro is all digital. I didn't get the disc tray for it. I would imagine the next Xbox is going to be digital only. They're already not releasing their first-party games now on disc in many cases. We're waiting for limited run to produce those copies. And even then, we're seeing like multi-platform releases come out on disc. Like PS5 versions of Xbox games getting a disc release, but the Xbox versions being non-existent on a disc. Crazy. So, as you know...
Yeah, I think...
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it will get worse because we're starting to see games that rely on like cloud... they're offloading stuff to the server, AI processing, and various bits and pieces. And so I I do get where the developers are coming from, that it can be difficult to, especially when you've built the game, it can be very hard to like strip out any online stuff. But what they need to be doing is building the game, thinking about when we sunset this game, how can we make sure something of it is still playable in the way that they had a solution for Knockout City.
Yeah, which is great. And that private server version still exists. You can still download and play it. There's a community that allow you to play it online. It exists still. You can play that video.
I don't know why you wouldn't. I don't know why you wouldn't want that. And like, so Rematch, which we're playing at the moment, currently has very basic like AI in the tutorial and stuff. So what I would want from that is that they put AI as a more as a like a kind of a proper like training mode, and then when they stop the game, they let you like matchmake with someone. Custom matches with AI, and the same with Rocket League. Rocket League has pretty bad AI, but you would want to still be able to do like a direct match, even in like 20 years when they've killed Rocket League. But whether that's realistic, I think it's things are slightly different to how they were when you were kind of properly hosting a game on, you know, like original Xbox and stuff. You were the host. The server was kind of your Xbox, and it's a bit. I feel like things work a bit differently now. But I would like them to. I think that's what hopefully will come out of this petition, is that developers will start thinking about the long term, and some sort of. I remember it was with Calling All Cars on PS3, which we came back to. We met up once and we came back to it. And the game had been the servers had been shut, and it was like, for such a simple game, how much is it to keep like one server,
little server with like capacity for like 20 players or something? Like, yeah, exactly. That The Last of Us Remastered and playing the factions multiplayer is still the example I think of, as that's how you do it. You can still join public matchmaking. There's been no support for that game for years. You just join lobbies and play, and it still runs. And that is exactly how it should be. Just, I imagine, a relatively low-cost, small server that facilitates that game. And that's awesome. That's all you need.
And like, we talked about, I think, last week about 1943. When did that come out? On 2009. I just fact-checked it. For that to still be running like last year or whenever it was that they finally shut it, from EA, who you would think are like trying to cut costs wherever they can, that's pretty good. I can't argue with that. Although I would like, again, even if it was just I can spawn into an empty map with no players, and I can run around the map and fire the guns
with a friend
to get the feel of that. Yeah, with a friend ideally. But even if you can't do it with a friend, just to play have offline. That feel.
Yeah,
exactly. Do the destructibility of the buildings, fire the grenade launcher from your M1 Garand or whatever. Just get the feel of the game that you haven't been able to play for so long.
Absolutely, and preserving that is important. It is important.
Which is why System Link, not this podcast, but the functionality of Xbox consoles in particular, was always a good thing, because you could effectively multiplayer. You know, games that had been killed, and there's that X-Link. On the original Xbox, where you can kind of jerry-rig it to play online on some of those.
And it's great that communities are doing that. And like we've seen the Knockout City private server version, the developers made that available, but it was a community of fans that have now made that viable as an online server thing. But again, X-Link, you mentioned another example. These are sort of fan initiatives that have had no choice but to try and put these things into play, where the major publishers are happy to just sort of pull the plug, which is always been disappointing. Game with Passion and YouTube just mentioning, as a software engineer, I can understand some of the issues with stop killing games, but I'm hoping they can figure out something. Yeah, I agree. I think this is something that it should spark conversation, because this is something that is very relevant, very contemporary right now, that is on the front of a lot of people's minds. Wrapping up this evening System Link with just a few headlines. We've got the Ghost of Yotei State of Play starting just now, actually. We're shooting this with now 10 PM UK time. I cannot wait for that game. I love Tsushima. I hope they confirm a multiplayer mode for Yotei, because the multiplayer in Tsushima is like an unsung hero. Came out like 6 months after launch, and it was awesome. I absolutely rinsed that with Johnny. It's a friend of mine that we've played many hours of that. EA have said that Battlefield is targeting 100 million players lifetime. I'll take this one. I'll just take this one for a second. Not gonna happen. Fucking nonsense. That is Square Enix levels of unrealistic expectations. Makes me very concerned that for all this Battlefield Labs testing, are we just going to be just running this game into the ground? Another misstep from EA there. Really, really bizarre.
What's the install base of PlayStation 5 now?
Not
Do you know?
that.
I feel like you'd have to all the Xbox install base, all the PlayStation install base, and some PC players.
And I don't
would
even
have
think
to-
then it still covers that target. Crazy number. More than any prior Battlefield. When they're at the worst point the franchise has ever been. The least successful and the most negative sentiment.
That is everything that's wrong with AAA games at the moment.
Yeah.
Is that your solution to a flop is to pump money into try and make a game, but a game that they had already pumped loads of money into and probably had the most devs working on it ever before. That flops. So then you do that again, but with even more people working on it, and think it's going to make it better. And everything we've said is the solution to that is you scale massively back with a team of people that you think are the highest quality, that really get the series, get the fans.
But you
and
incubate
just make something
a small
that the fans like.
You make 1944, don't you? You make Battlefield 1944, small release, 3 maps, and people would go insane. Why don't we manage these studios?
And they're doing the right thing, getting the community involved. But the concern is, I feel like they're still developing the game in exactly the same way that they ever have done before, except they're saying to the community, look, isn't this great, as they're doing it.
Yep. Yeah. To finish on a positive, something I was actually really chuffed to see, a surprise update for The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered, where you can play it chronologically. Very interesting idea, especially because obviously the game is the full fat version compared to where the show naturally had to trim some things out. I would be very interested in going back to that now and playing that in a completely linear fashion. So much of the original game's design, it was meant to be that drip feed of like you hate Abby and then you sort of have that redemption arc with her, you learn more about her. To play it, I think, in sequence with flashbacks as well could be very interesting, especially because they've reordered the cutscenes as well. Like the whole game is.
I was going to ask what they've exactly done to it. It sounds cool.
It's completely reconfigured, and completing it unlocks Uncharted outfits for Joel and Tommy dressed as Nathan and Sam Drake from Uncharted 4 that you can use in the no return mode. Lovely. That's great. Lovely stuff, Naughty Dog. That's a nice positive way to wrap up tonight's System Link. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in. You can find us at Burly Media at Facebook, Instagram, Threads, YouTube, Spotify, and Podbean, as well as our Discord community. Please come and join us over there. Shout out as well to the lovely chaps at Gaming Arcadia, who have always been really great supporters of us. Mike, where can people find you?
I am at thexboxguide.com and at the Xbox Guide on Threads and Blue Sky.
We're going to be back next Wednesday at 9:15 UK time for another episode of System Link, as well as this Saturday for another episode of Burly Bird Live, where Mike and I play probably the finals, probably rematch,
has to be,
probably Rocket League. It's going to be one of our customary three right now. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you next time.
See ya.